Alrighty. Moving on to the Awoken commons for this tier list. Now, I will say, maybe this is a bit of a hot take. I fully admit I'll have many of them along the way. I don't think the general pool of Awoken commons are very good. Now, I will say, I generally think that Awoken is the most powerful clan in the game. All things considered, just kind of averaged across the board, but I wouldn't say that the common tier drafts are really where their strength lies. In fact, I would say it's potentially one of their weaknesses. It's not just straight up bad, I would say, but there's not really a whole lot you can like build around out of the common tier here. There's a few, but not much, and a lot of them are just sort of middle of the road to just really bad. One in particular you can probably guess, but I think one of them is potentially the worst card in the game. Definitely a top 5 worst card in the game. But anyway, that is just the little intro we got, and we're gonna do it the same way we did the last one, where we'll just go through the line here. You can make your guesses before I get to them. So the first one we got up is Glimmer. Now, Glimmer, I think, is honestly pretty good. I'm putting it in the A tier. It's cheap, it's AoE, it also heals. That can be relevant sometimes. At 2 damage, it's really not good. It begs to be upgraded. So obviously, if you're not going to hit any Merchant of Magics, even if you don't, there's always a chance for plus 30 and plus 10 piercing. This one, unlike Vent, I would say benefits about equally from both. Probably still prefer piercing, I would say, but whereas Vent, like the plus 30 isn't super great, I would say. The plus 30 is pretty great here because you have the heal on top of everything. You know, you might have Cultivate procs, but in general you might just be damaged, and hey, having this like plus 30 and holdover is really good with Glimmer. I wouldn't say it's a card you can necessarily build around, but it's just a really nice card to have. Prior to the DLC, I would have put it S tier. You know, because you had to answer the AoE question very specifically, Glimmer was a great way to do that. If you saw like Shade Wings ahead of you for the Seraph fight, Glimmer you could build around essentially. You're looking to hold it over and put 10 on it, but you're really not. I rarely am putting holdover on Glimmer post DLC, it's just kind of there. But for the record, plus 30 and holdover is not bad at all. That's a good heal, it's good damage. But it mainly is representing heal at the end of the game at that point, because like we said, there's just so much spell shield. So I think it's A tier. You want to upgrade it. If it's not upgraded, you want to remove it. It's useless at 2 damage and 2 heal. And the next one we got is one of my most taken cards in the game. I didn't list it in my top 10 cards because I think a big artifact of why it's the most taken is kind of just an artifact of how kind of underwhelming a lot of the other choices are in Awoken, but I am very, very happy to see a Razorsharp Edge when I get it as a common rarity draft for Awoken. The thing about Awoken is they don't have any offensive scaling past the common tier. So, and really even at the common tier, I would argue none of these scaling offensive cards are really good outside of Razorsharp Edge. So I don't know if it itself is like an amazing card necessarily. I think it's really good, really solid, but for the record, it's one of my most picked cards because it just happens to always win out over all of the other commons. Prior to the DLC, I think it was better because that scaling was very rarely gonna be not enough. I'd say in the DLC world, sometimes it's not enough. Sometimes you need to spell chain it or something. I'm often hellventing this card, by the way. I think Razorsharp Edge is a uninteresting / boring but pretty good hellvent target. The -2 is unfortunately not killing any enemies these days outside the first ring or so. It doesn't even kill up any sharded enemies, so before it could, up until about the mid-game, be used as offense a lot of the time. I think that aspect of it has fallen off. But all in all, it still is like your best just straight up option at scaling for Awoken outside of specific things such as Cultivate procs or Adaptive Mutation shenanigans, stuff like that. So I'd go so far as to say a run with Awoken that finds Razorsharp Edge versus a one that doesn't is like a completely different run. It's just how crazily pivotal this card is. Now sometimes your secondary clan can make up for it, but other times it's something like Umbra where really they're not gonna make up for it outside of like an Ember Drain thing. Like you really want to find Razorsharp Edge in those type of situations. And on top of that note, I might just add that if you see it, similar to Fledgling Imp and Hellhorn, that would be the default pick for me, and I need a really damn good reason to not pick Razorsharp Edge over the other options. Like it is almost always the correct choice to take Razorsharp Edge. The next one we got is one that is I don't really know how to evaluate this on Restoration Detonation. I'm putting it in B tier for now. I could see arguments for it being A or even C tier. I will say I've liked it a little bit as of late, since I'm typically going Cultivate or rather Rejuvenation so often. I've kind of started to like Thorn Hollow a bit more, and Awoken Hollow I've come to really, really like. And obviously if there's a Steel Singer, you like that. So there are some more targets. I guess my problem with Restoration Detonation is there are too many times it does nothing for you, and then it is literally basically a dead weight, which makes it hard for me to give it anything higher than a B tier. But if you have any of the hollows, or if you just are getting damaged a lot, it is obviously a very good card. You know, 50 base damage, 10 base heal, that's really good early game. You can upgrade it with a plus 30 damage, or just 2 plus 10s, or even can Surge Stone it if it's not like a super central part of your strategy. And then it will still give you a decent heal late game, and then pretty decent damage. I guess my problem though is like, you know, Awoken is a class with the most access to quick. On top of that, they have, you know, sometimes you just regen a lot, and you, for whatever reason, you just often don't find yourself missing health. And in those cases, it just sucks to have Restoration Detonation. So it's a tough one, because like often when you take it, you don't know if you're going to be able to use it or not. So I'd much prefer something that I know, like a Razorsharp Edge or a Glimmer. I know that those will be useful for me, so I'd like to take them over it. But sometimes you're not offered those, and then Restoration Detonation is an option, and it has one that has a pretty high ceiling, but it also has no floor at all. So I don't love it, but I'm liking it a lot more. I could see it maybe making like A- tier eventually. And as for the next one, there is no world, no world it will ever be anything other than D tier. I should honestly create F tier for this one. Sharpen. This is such a bad card. If I were to give it any benefit of the doubt, I will say if you start with the card, it's not horrible ring 1. Maybe ring 2 as well, but past that, it is so bad. Like, why does this card cost 2? Even if you have a Gnarled Root, for example, it still doesn't give you the damage that Razorsharp Edge gives, and it costs 2. So I think Sharpen sucks. It's candidate for me. If you told me it was the worst card in the game, I wouldn't disagree with you. I think maybe I wouldn't put it as a single worst card in the game, because it's like, I don't know, I might. I honestly might. It's really bad. Don't ever take it. Literally never take it. There used to be a reason to take it when Wrathful Spikes Prince was a thing that would work. And it was actually a really good card specifically for that situation. But now it is so bad. It is so bad. I'd love to see any reason that anyone thinks this is nothing other than just an awful card that ever has a reason to be taken. It just doesn't. It's a losing play. There's like, prior to the DLC, you could take it as a desperation form of offensive scaling. Now you can't even do that. There's no way that 4 flat damage for 2 Ember ever makes sense. I don't even take it as like a potential, what is that one artifact called? The Split Anvil. I don't even take it as like a Split Anvil generator or whatever. Just no way, man. No effing way. So bad. 4 attack for 2 Ember. How is that acceptable? And 4 spikes. 4 spikes doesn't kill shit. Late game, you need 25 fucking spikes, or 20 spikes, I can't remember exactly, to basically kill most of the backliners in the game. Some of them won't even die to that. So how does this card make any sense? I'll tell you how it makes sense. It doesn't. Don't ever take this card. Holy shit, don't. Just don't. And the next one, I put it in the B tier. You know, I'd kind of mentioned before, like, there are these other offensive scaling options like Sharpen and Steel Enhancer, but Razorsharp Edge is just so much better, right? And I think that kind of is the same here with Steel Enhancer. Now, the one thing I will say is Steel Enhancer, it's a takeable card. That's what I'll give it. It's not a bad spell chain target. Essentially, for a spell chain, it will get you, for 1 Ember, the same stats that a Making of a Morsel would get you for 1 Ember. But I guess the benefit here is that you don't have to wait for it to gorge. But, you know, that's 15 shards that you had to invest for it to even do that. So, I don't love it. I think it's a really good incant spell, of course. Very good in Stygian decks that pair with Awoken. It provides a little bit of defense and a little bit of offense, but I'll be honest, I'm rarely ever putting it on my frontliner for the defensive aspect. Usually I would just be putting it on my backliner. It's kind of nice to have Razorsharp and a Steel Enhancer, because then you're offsetting the health loss, which can be relevant sometimes. It's pretty good with like Primordium, especially if you have a Stalwart stack. You know, it can be pretty good with Wormkin in general, I would say. If you have an infused Steel Enhancer, is pretty good. So it really depends on the combo. I would say if in the most general sense, though, it's not that worth it a lot of the time. Like, it's just too slow. 3 attack, 3 health, that's really not much. For 0 Ember, it's great value, but similar to Fortify, it's much better than Fortify. I mean, it's usable. I find myself taking it, you know, and being somewhat impressed with it sometimes, whereas I can't say that for Fortify, but I will say 3 and 3 just often isn't enough, and this shouldn't be a go-to card, I would say, that you're looking to add. It's just kind of like, if the other options aren't better, it will do. That's kind of how I feel about it. And that's Steel Enhancer. Then we got Sting, which is a weird one. You know, in general, there's a lot of these cards that kind of just cost 0. Well, there's not a lot of them. There's a few of them that cost 0, and they draw the next turn in Awoken. So like Engraft, Ensnare, and Sting are the examples there. Engraft technically costs 1, but it doesn't cost 1 because it gets the energy refunded. So we'll just say it costs 0. But whereas Engraft and Ensnare, I think, are really good cards. I don't really think Sting is, because even though, yeah, it doesn't cost anything other than that initial draw, I think there's just no upside with this card, whereas the other cards have a lot of upside. And even just the floor of the other cards is better. This one, it just does 10 front-loaded damage. I would the situations I would say it's enticing in are Stygian, of course. It's very good for Stygian. A 0 cost, 0 target spell that you know, triggers an incant and gives you a draw the other turn. That could even be a spell chain target. It wouldn't be horrible in an incant deck. It would actually be very good in an incant deck. And then the other situations, of course, would be if I found an early Sting artifact, though I feel like there's a chicken egg there. It's like I would have had to start with Stings really to take those, though maybe I would just take them speculatively because the other options were bad. I mean, as we saw in my Awoken artifact tier list, there's not really that many good Awoken artifacts, so you might just end up with a Sting one without Stings, and then you find a Sting. I guess I've done that before. But just as a base card, I just can't see myself adding Sting. And also with Wormkin, if it is infused, it's probably worth it. But yeah, I don't know. In a general sense, 10 damage really isn't that much. It's not going to... It could be okay, but it does cost that initial draw, even if it does technically cycle itself the next turn, in terms of digging through your deck, or just making a hand larger. I don't think it's really that worth including in too many decks. But I'm willing to admit I could be wrong on that. Maybe Sting is actually good, but I don't know. It doesn't. I would just rather have something that actually impacts the game a bit more. Then Vinegrasp. This one's tricky. I think prior to the DLC I'd put it A tier, but post DLC it's pretty hard to get it. 3 damage is not a good breakpoint in the DLC. Similar to, like, you know, you won't, a little bit of a spoiler alert, but when we get to Umbra, you won't see me rank Entumbra Assault that high because of the same reason. It's like 3 damage, doesn't kill an early sharded up backliner. If you add 10 to it, it doesn't kill the 15. Like 10 in Pierce doesn't even kill the 15 health backliners, of which most the Divinity fight and the Seraph fight is. And even if you added 10 Pierce and 10 damage to it, you know, you're doing 23 damage, still doesn't kill a Shadewing at 25, so it's pretty underwhelming, the 3 damage, but I will say, as a utility card, it's pretty good. It can still kill stuff at various points in the game, and depending on what upgrades you put on it, it can be used for self-sacrifice on tombs and imps and stuff. It is pretty good on your own units for positional manipulation. I would almost say I use it on my own units for rotating them around more often than I do for like pulling the enemies. But it can still be useful for pulling the enemies out of the way. You know, that one fun thing you can do is if you have a fragile sweeper, you can in the Divinity fight Vinegrasp the Shard Channeler, the Spike Channeler to the front. And then the way the sweep works is it will kill the Channeler, and then actually you don't take any spikes damage after that. It's not a super obvious interaction, but that's something to keep in your pocket, basically. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's fallen off a bit in the DLC. It's still okay, though. It's still not bad. I would much prefer just to get the artifact that gets me Vinegrasps each turn, though, than actually having a Vinegrasp. Similar to Sting, I don't know that I am super thrilled to have it in my deck necessarily. But definitely against like Talos the Pusher, it's a nice tech card to get around that. Though I find that much less of an issue these days, as more of a free DLC issue. And then the final one we have on here is another one that I would say lost value in the DLC, but is still pretty good. Wildwood Sap. You know, regen, it would definitely be S tier prior to the DLC. Maybe even, I don't know if it would beat Razorsharp Edge, but they'd be pretty close. Post DLC, regen's a lot harder to make work. You need a lot of regen for the end game. But that being said, it'll get you through the early game quite well. You know, just a Wildwood Sap 2 especially will definitely get you through the first 3 rings of Relentless. It just gets a little tricky if it's going to actually have value for you later on, but at least it's a 1-cost consumable that, even if it's not going to be your main plan to winning Relentless, it still might just be okay that it's not like a high priority removal at least. And it really does benefit a lot from the double stack or consume remove upgrades, I will also say that. Because nothing really outdoes it. In terms of just pure regen, right? Nothing else in the game is as dedicated to regen as Wildwood Sap, so you'll know early on if you can get enough regen if you get maybe some early double stacks or early consume removes, or an early what do you call it? Whatever that artifact is, it doubles the effect of regen. You know, all these things can be indicators that you can still make regen be your Relentless solution, and in those cases you can still use it. Another thing I will say though is like Cultivate in general is just really nice. I say Cultivate, I guess when I say Cultivate, what I mean is Rejuvenation. You know, it's often going to be Awoken Hollow, probably the most common, so it just kind of goes hand in hand with Cultivate, but it's plenty fine for Steel Singer and Thorn Hollow, right? Or just any frontliner in general, but it just adds extra procs every turn. It has additional procs continue into Relentless, even if the regen isn't enough to outpace the boss's damage. at least if you're tanky enough and you're surviving enough turns, you're getting those extra rejuvenation procs, which can be pretty good. And even I don't really recommend going explosive sentient these days outside of Wormkin and maybe Stygian. I really don't recommend it with any of the other clan combos, but it is worth noting if you do end up with explosive sentient, it's really good there. That pretty much guarantees into Relentless you're able to keep getting those damage procs off. And that is pretty much it for Awoken. Let me know what you thought. Anything, let me know if you think it was a hot take that I don't think. You know, when you look at this, it's like, they're not horrible, but they're certainly not as good as like Hellhorn, right? And a few of the other clans, like Umbra, I feel has very good on common tier cards. So, but we'll get to those when we get to those. I would say it's not horrible. I think they got, from the B tier down, I think is where it suffers. Like A tier on up, you're fine, but if you never, it's definitely some runs you just don't find these S or A tier cards, and you're just offered the B through D tiers, and those are rough runs in my opinion. I think those are often pretty rough runs. Anyway, that will do it for this one. As always, thanks for watching, and until next time, peace.